Hey, everybody. Welcome. We're going to give it another minute or two to get some more people in here. Happy to have those that joined on time, but we know we all go meeting to meeting. So I'm going to give another 2 to 3 minutes and then we'll have Manish kick us off.
Sounds good, man.
In the meantime, Manish, I love your jacket. Is it cold where you are?
Yeah, I'm in Ohio, so it is cold today.
Nice.
The weather's been waffling around between 60s and 40s. So today's the cold day.
Great. All right. Well, I see some more attendees, so let's get started. I would be respectful of your time. Welcome, everybody, to our fourth session in a series of Understanding Purview, Microsoft Purview. Today's session is about how to start protecting your organization and staying compliant within Microsoft Purview. So real quick, we're gonna do a little intros. Spoiler alert, the two guys on camera are the two people that are gonna do all the talking. We also are gonna jump into kind of a landscape overview of regulatory concerns and compliance that vary country by country, state by state here in the US. We'll talk about some common challenges while dealing with compliance. Understanding Microsoft Purview for compliance. This is basically the meat of our topic today. And then implementing using Purview for compliance. And then we'll end with some questions and answers if anybody has any. Also, feel free to use the Q&A. During this session, I'll be answering Q&A as Manish talks. So great, introductions. As I mentioned, the two people on camera are the two talkers. So I'm Matt Marr. I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a senior technical director with NetWoven. I focus on our cloud infrastructure and security work stream. I'm joined today with Manish, who's a senior engagement director. As you
Hey,
might have
everyone.
heard, he's from Ohio, so it's a little bit colder where he is than I am.
There you go.
Um,
Believe it or
great.
not, Boston is warmer than Ohio.
We have a warm spell.
All right.
All right, and just a little background about NetWoven. We are a Microsoft Solutions partner. We belong to the exclusive MISA program, the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, which only 100 or so partners worldwide are invited to. We also were recognized by Gartner as being one of the best migration service providers out there. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the main show. Manish, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. So we'll be covering some regulatory landscape and the importance of compliance. We will drive that first, and then we'll get into the purview side of things so that we have a level set on what regulations we are talking about and how to stay compliant using Microsoft Purview. So as you can see, there are so many different compliance regulations that are coming up, not only on the country level, but also on individual state level. Many of the times, these state level regulations are a subset or superset of some of these larger regulations, right? So the ever increasing amount of data collected by organizations around the world is raising concern, right? So we are concerned about privacy. We are worried about regulatory compliance. So if you think about your own industry, right? You could be working in healthcare, aerospace, finance, whatever it is. There are so many regulations that you may or may not be aware of. So you have to work with your legal teams to understand, legal and compliance team to understand what regulations are really impacting your business. So some of the questions you can, as a compliance admin, you probably ask yourself is, do you know if you are basically required to retain any data? What happens if your data is leaked, right, outside your organization? What are the legal implications? What are the compliance implications? What are the fines that we are talking about? And are you deleting your data that you do not need anymore? Or are you just holding data and that data can be discovered if there is any compliance, basically, if you are non-compliant, essentially. So if that data is going to be used against you, you need to be worried about that. So definitely there are some of these are very important questions that every compliance admin, compliance person who is working on any of the collaboration software or software that is sharing personal data, software that is sharing more like legal data. So you need to be worried about all those things. So as you know, data is power. Governments want to show that they are doing something, right? That's why they have created all these different regulations. And as part of an organization, you are collecting customer data every day, and you are interacting with the customer data. Many times customer data can leak out of your organization. We don't want to, but there is definitely a rigor around maintaining this customer data. You are probably putting guardrails around your systems. You are making sure that this customer data is handled correctly. Then regulations are also creating a need for usage of this personal data, right? So if you are not complying with it, for example, GDPR, it can result in fines. If you or also withdrawal of your license, or your credibility can get affected in the market and with the regulators and customers as well. Also, with the increase in the BYOD, so bring your own devices, and also the cloud adoption, especially it has expedited big time after COVID and during COVID. So the increasing the adoption of this in the companies definitely is causing more concern about data theft, data loss. So there are a lot of concerns, and not staying compliant is not a good thing, right? I mean, we know that, yeah, especially in the European Union, the GDPR has become like the model for data privacy laws. As I mentioned, every state is looking at GDPR and other such laws and creating their own, just like the UK. In UK, they also took the GDPR and now they are creating a different set of compliance regulations. So you should be aware of all these different rules, regulations, and whatever software that you build, whatever processes you build, should address the compliance side of things. Okay, so these are some of the top data concerns based on the research firms, right? So cybersecurity is constantly shifting the landscape, right? As our digital world continues to grow, so do our risks. According to the research, 83%, right here, 83% of organizations experienced one data breach in their lifetime, of which 20% of the data breaches are due to the internal actors, with an average cost of 14.5 million when an insider is involved. So 9.5 million when it's just the average of data breach, but especially when there is an internal person leaking data, it could be much higher than just the $9.5 million. So data leaks and thefts might be overshadowed by external thefts, right? In the past, we were more concerned about external threats, but now internal threats have also increased, especially with the ease of availability of data to internal resources. If there are no checks and balances in your systems, then that data can be easily exposed by the internal threat to outside your company. So recent Microsoft research also shows that 80% of the decision makers have implemented multiple products. So they could be using, for example, CrowdStrike, they could be using Zscaler, they could be using Microsoft to clamp down on the data security. They want to ensure that data is highly secured in their environment. So with this fragmented solution landscape, it brings more complexity uh, to your security teams. That means additional cost, additional efforts to bring together all these signals so that you have one remediation plan across all these different systems. So it's getting just harder and harder to manage your data to be compliant. So why is compliance so important? Why do we talk about compliance? So what is compliance, right? I mean, data compliance, if you go to Wikipedia, it refers to the adherence of laws, regulations, and industry standards that govern how organizations collect, store, use, and dispose of data, right? So it's very important that you understand what data compliance is, that you have to adhere to the laws, regulations, and there could be industry standards as well. It's not just always legal. There could be some industry standards that you have to follow to essentially do all these things, right? Collecting your data, storing your data, how you effectively use it, and then how you effectively you dispose your data. So that is also very important to know. So some of the reasons why data compliance is so important is, first of all, protecting individual privacy and data security, right? So you want to mitigate risks of identity theft, fraud, other malicious activities by securing your personal data, right? So your customer personal data. It also demonstrates that you are following some responsible data practices. You are fostering secure and transparent environment for your users, and also you are taking care of their data, right? I mean, in the end, your customers will care about that. If something is leaked with or without your knowledge, that is going to be a bad look for your organization. The next one is mitigating the risks of data breaches and avoiding legal consequences. By mitigating data breaches, it safeguards the sensitive information. So you're preventing harm like identity theft, financial losses to your individuals, including your customers, and also making sure that your reputational damage and is not affected, and also ensuring that the financial penalties for your organizations is not going to happen, right? So you're just ensuring that. It also builds the trust and maintains positive reputation. I talked about it in a bullet above, but one of the things is that you want to make sure that customers trust you, right? They can trust you with their data, and they know that you really have a way to safely and securely manage their data. So being compliant with applicable regulations and standards is a way of not only doing business, but also maintaining a trust where your customers can definitely say that, okay, company X, I can totally trust them because they take good care of data. They have never had a data loss, or they did not have any ransomware. So making sure that image is maintained is very important in your business. So improving data governance and efficiency. So strong data governance ensures data is handled according to regulations, minimizes the penalties and the reputational damage. It also improves if efficiency, streamlining data handling, leading to more reliable data for accurate analysis, right? So in the end, you also want to make sure that your data is accurate so that you can gain some insights into your data, and you can also make some good decisions out of it. And one of the most important reason, which is not here, but I'm going to talk, is the fines, right? So if you are not compliant with regulations, and if there is an audit and you're found non-compliant, you could be fined by the country or the legal entity, right? And for example, Meta was fined for $1.2 billion in May of 2023 for transferring personal data of European users to the United States without adequate data protection mechanisms. So this is like one of the bigger examples in the recent years where the GDPR was used for Meta to pay the fines because they were not compliant to GDPR rules. Okay, so what are some of the common compliance challenges, right? I mean, we want to know why is compliance so hard, correct? So the first one is changing regulations. So in changing regulations, the first point is increased costs and resource strains, right? So adopting any new regulation often requires modifying processes. It requires training your employees. It requires updating your technology. Sometimes your technology could be outdated. It is not able to stay compliant, right? Your systems are not able to stay compliant and the technology is not supporting it. So you need to basically upgrade it so that it starts becoming compliant to the laws. Then the other one is operational disruption and delays, right? So implementing changes might disrupt established workflows, right? While you're building new things, uh, the old way of doing things are not current and they are non-compliant. So that means there would be some disruption in the how the workflow is happening, and this could result into the operational hiccups and potential delays in projects and service delivery. So the more changes the regulations are happening in your industry, the more catch up you have to do, and that could cause potential delays in your projects and service delivery. Heightened risk of non compliance, right? So, if your organization fails to properly understand and implement new regulations, they are just exposing themselves to legal penalties, correct? So, and then there is a reputational damage and operational consequences to it as well. So, ensure that regulations that you are followed are being basically looked at. So if there is any new regulation that comes in your industry or existing regulations are changed, ensure that you stay in touch with your legal teams, compliant team, have a governance body that can update the software side of things or your application side of things so that you can upgrade these software applications to ensure that data loss is not going to happen and you are staying compliant as well. The next one is managing data governance, right? So there is an increased risk of data breaches. So we all know there are a lot of cases where data, I just talked about it in the statistics slide, that there is an increased risk of data breaches across all the industries. And essentially, without defined access controls and security protocols, sensitive data becomes vulnerable to unauthorized access, leaks, and cyber attacks. So this is definitely a big concern across all the industries. Inconsistent data quality, right? Lack of standards, lack of data standards, quality checks to ensure that your data is up to the mark can also lead to inaccurate, incomplete, and duplicate information. This hinders the accurate reporting, decision making, and compliance efforts as unreliable data cannot be trusted. So definitely trust is important in our industry. Hindered regulatory audits, right? So without clear data lineage, you will not know, or documentation, the organization may not understand where their data is, right? They may not be able to demonstrate how it is used and also prove that the compliance procedures are followed. So that just means that when audit happens, you will just have delayed approvals, you will have potential pension sanctions or penalties that will be impacted applied to you because you did not follow the procedure in the first place, right? So there are those concerns as well. Then there are third-party risks. So, for example, data leaks and privacy breaches, right? If a third party experiences the data breach and you are interacting with the third party company, then if they are not upheld to the same standard, right, as you expect yourself, then there could be regulatory fines, lawsuits, and your data, if gets exposed through these third parties because they did not have the controls in place, then your reputation will also be affected because in the end, you are the company that was working with this third party and you did not put enough checks for the third party to follow. Then there are non-compliance with regulations, right? So third parties may have different compliance requirements. So let's say they are audit firm, they may have a different compliance need. Or if they are more like a down the stream supplier, which is a small mom and pop supplier, they may not have understanding of all the compliance rules that are required for you as a top tier supplier, right? So you just want to make sure that your third parties are also up to the standard and they are not basically going to have any compliance issues. And then operation disruption, right? So the third party non-compliance, if they are found non-compliant and if you cannot do business with them, then you are looking at supply chain issues, you are looking at any fines. And so there are a lot of implications if a third party is not held to a good standard. And there will definitely be some operation disruptions because of this. Then there are emerging technologies, right? So the uncharted regulatory landscape. You just don't. So let's say, for example, AI, blockchain, and a lot of new technologies coming up. And many of these technologies are outpacing the regulatory landscape. So regulations are not catching up with these newer technologies. And then eventually they will catch with the emergent technology, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you are maintaining good compliance standards, even though they are not always written in stone, right? There may not be any compliance guidance, but you still need to implement good data stewardship so that you will be in compliance when the new law is written about such new technology. Data privacy and security challenges. Emerging technology often generates and processes vast amount of data. So there you have an issue, right? So AI will generate a lot of data. Then you also want to make sure that you are putting guardrails around the data that is generated by AI. Not only the data that was original data, but also the data that was generated by the AI systems. It could be your bot systems, it could be your generative AI applications. So also ensuring that complying with the complex data protection regulations, GDPR, CCPA, now it becomes very challenging with emerging technologies. There are also algorithmic biases and discriminations. So AI algorithms can unknowingly perpetuate biases based on training data, leading to discriminatory outcomes, right? So you want to make sure that your newer technologies are following some responsible, for example, in AI world, responsible AI, right? So you are ensuring that you are maintaining these systems to the best of your abilities to ensure for the future compliance standards, you are covering it even before they are brought in. Okay? Then the next one is limited budget. Not everybody, not all organizations have unlimited budget to do compliance. So if you have inadequate training and awareness, can lead to essentially not having the your users, your data stewards to have lack of proper training and awareness, right? And regulatory as well as policies. So that could cause a lot of issues where there is an employee knowledge gap and you're not up to date with all the different compliance needs. And then there could be outdated or subpar technology, right? So limited resources might restrict the organization from investing in robust compliance technologies like data security systems or automated monitoring tools. So this can make it very hard for your organization and the people who are taking care of your data to prevent data breaches, compliance breaches, and this could potentially cause fines. Then insufficient resources are available to investigate and remediate, right? So when you have some potential compliance issue, if you don't have enough resources in your organizations to troubleshoot them, to ensure that now you become compliant again, that could delay some of this investigation. And also that could result in loss or you might get some regulatory sanctions. And the last one is the compliance culture. No, sorry. And the last one is compliance culture, right? So you have increased exposure to penalties if you're non-compliant. You could be having a reputational damage, as we talked before, and loss of trust by your customers. You could also face operational disruptions and inefficiencies. So lack of compliance can lead to like internal investigations, audits. We touched upon many of these things. So definitely staying compliant helps. Next is let's talk about Microsoft Purview and how Microsoft Purview can help you stay compliant, right? So what is Microsoft Purview? So Microsoft Purview is a unified platform that combines data governance, data security, and risk and compliance solution. It helps organizations gain visibility, control, and protection over their data, right? So there are six major elements inside the Microsoft Purview. We call them Microsoft Purview solutions. The first one is information protection. This is the solution that you would use for discovering data. You would basically, to understand what data you have, what sensitive data you have, you would classify that data. So for example, is it a financial data? Is it a GDPR type of data? Is it a PI data? And then you will take some steps to protect that sensitive data by utilizing the sensitivity labels. The next one is the data loss prevention. So this is the one where you would identify, monitor, and automatically protect sensitive items across various workloads. So here's where you would protect a document which has sensitive information, for example, credit cards, from being emailed to somebody's gmail.com, right? So you will take some proactive steps to ensure that data loss or data leakage, as they say, is not happening from your systems. So another thing is e-discovery. This is where your legal team might open a case so that you can start finding out whether a particular person or a group of people have any legal related documentation. But to identify that and ensure that you can hold that information for legal people to look at, right? Legal departments to look at, you need to put some kind of a e-discovery hold on it. And this is where e-discovery comes in. The fourth is insider risk management. So TLP is fine, but if you don't understand what your insiders are doing with your data, there is a potential risk here, right? That you don't understand what how they are using your systems, whether they are emailing. So there could be a chain of action where a person who has resigned or who has been let go has done a particular number of steps, like they downloaded 1,000 documents, then they copied it to a USB drive, or they emailed hundreds of documents to their Gmail. So all those things you need to start understanding. And that's where insider risk management brings that kind of information to you. Along with DLP, you can definitely build a robust way of stopping this insider risk. Then there is a data lifecycle management. So data lifecycle management, record retention, essentially it manages your retention, it manages how you delete your information, manages the life cycle of your data within your organization. So you stay compliant. And the last one is information governance. So if you use Microsoft Purview data governance, you would know what kind of data you are having in your organization. It may or may not even be Microsoft 365 data, right? It could be in your databases, it could be in your AWS, it could be in your Azure file share, whatnot. So you want to understand that and secure it using the tagging functionality or the classification functionality in information protection. So information governance is another piece where it also adds compliance, but to your non-standard, non-Microsoft 365 data sources primarily. So how does Purview help your organization to stay compliant, right? So reducing the risk of data breaches and regulatory fines, Purview offers data discovery, tools to understand and classify sensitive information. It also enforces access controls through secure data zones and automates tasks like record management, all while providing audit trails for regulatory requirements. So these are the things that you can think about when Purview, right? How can it help me? The next one is simplifying compliance processes and saving time and effort, right? So Microsoft Purview streamlines compliance by automated assessments. So you can run automated assessments of your environment. It also identifies data at risk, and then it also proposes some or recommends some corrective actions. So you can definitely use some automation within Microsoft Purview to take the advantage and ensure that you're being compliant. And it also improves the data security and governance. So Purview offers like a unified view of data across various sources, right? So it can look at your OneDrive's, SharePoint, it can look at your email, it can look at your Teams, and even the third-party software as well, SaaS products. And then it can essentially build like a uniform way of looking at all this data and ensuring that you are doing some automated discovery, classification, and lineage tracking through the Purview governance portal. Then you are also demonstrating compliance to auditors and governors, stakeholders. So when you have Microsoft Purview implemented, you can help your compliance folks, legal folks, to work with the auditors and stakeholders, right? By ensuring that all the data is collected correctly, you have a good understanding of where your data is. You are running those assessment periodically, ensuring that you have high levels of compliance through those assessments, and just it shows that you know how to manage your data, you know how to collect and analyze your data across your Microsoft ecosystem, right? So it's very important that you look at Microsoft Purview. So these are the 5 tools that Microsoft Purview provides you to stay compliant. I touched upon a few of those already, but data lifecycle management is one where you can ensure the data is properly classified, then it's retained correctly, and then it's used and deleted across all the Microsoft apps, right? So it's one solution that ensures that you are not uh, accumulating data, and you are basically getting rid of data that is no longer needed, and that just reduces your risks, right? And it also helps you meet the compliance. There is another tool called as the compliance manager. So this one is essentially, it simplifies your uh, the entire risk assessment, right? So it has some risk assessment built in, and it also has a lot of templates that you can use to essentially make sure that you can now start catering to your industry, your company, so that you know when you are meeting regulations, or if you're not meeting, you take some corrective actions. And then it's an easy way for you to report it to the auditor as well. E-discovery, essentially, it helps the organizations find, collect, analyze, and export relevant electronic information for legal matters or internal investigations. So the investigations could be based on a project, it could be on a person level. So you can create those cases, and then essentially it can search through your digital footprint in Microsoft 365 and then bring all that data together, so it's packaged and it can be shared with the auditors for easy consumption, and you will also have easier time to understand where all your data is for a particular case. Then there is an audit feature where all the data across all the different systems in Microsoft 365, I believe there are 30 systems that report the data to Microsoft Audit in the Compliance Manager. And that's where you would basically have the detailed log. You would query that audit report to verify which users have used which systems, what actions have they taken against the data. So it's a thorough, almost like an investigative tool that you can go and look at different things inside the Purview auditing. Communications compliance, this is where the risky messages from Teams, emails, and you can flag compliance, code of conduct violations, all using while protecting the user privacy, right? So there could be a lot of places where people are not following the communications compliance within your organization, but you have some rules, but you cannot monitor it. So if you implement Microsoft Purview compliance, communications compliance, you can start monitoring these. It could be in form of threats. It could be in part of somebody's accessing some non-sanctioned websites. So you can start looking at all those things through the communications compliance piece. Okay, so I'll just go over the implementing and using Microsoft Purview for compliance. So these are some of the steps to implement each one of these tools. So we'll just quickly go through them. So essentially for data lifecycle management, here are the steps that you can take to ensure that your data is basically up to date, and your data is fresh, and it doesn't have a lot of data that is old and that could be used against you in the auditing. So essentially, the first step is you understand your organization's data landscape, right? You look at your Microsoft 365, your non-Microsoft data assets, and then start understanding how the data is stored, what are the rules and compliance standards that you need to follow for each data. Let's say you are in the financial industry and 7 years is the amount of data you need to retain. If you're carrying the data, 15-year-old data, that could be a trouble, right? So you start basically understanding the compliance rules, and then you start classifying and labeling data so that you have a good handle on what is this data, right? Is it a financial data? Is it HR data? And based on that, you could have different retention policies. And then once you have retention policies, inside the retention policies, you can basically have retain the data, or you can delete it, or you can put legal hold against it. And there are different built-in workflows that you can use for the disposition. Ensure that you provide good user training on handling data. At the end of the day, without users handling the data correctly, none of this works well. Compliance Manager. So this is a tool that is available as part of all licenses of Microsoft 365, Office 365. So you can use it within the Purview portal, compliance portal. And essentially, what Compliance Manager gives you is it identifies data protection risks using the out of the box Microsoft data protection baseline assessment. So that covers a lot of things. And as you can see that it provides you a compliance score. So you can say that my organization is 45% compliant. You want to get up to 70, 75% compliance score. And it basically looks at all the different solutions within Microsoft, right? It not only looks at your regulations, it also looks at whether you have implemented MFA, have you used conditional access. So this compliance score also looks into other areas to ensure that you are becoming secure, more secure, as well as you're following the compliance. There are 320 pre-built templates covering industry regulations, standards, and internal policies. So this is another good tool. So you can basically not only have the out of the box protection template, but you can also use more templates that Microsoft has built. There are about 320 pre-built templates. You can also build highly tailored assessment. For example, you want to run GDPR based assessment, right? So you can create a new assessment called GDPR assessment. And then that will track how you're doing against the GDPR data. How do you collect data, use it, and that kind of stuff. You also monitor the compliance journey through scorecards and reports. So Compliance Manager also has reporting and scorecards, as you can see here, that tells you how you're doing against each one of these different built-in templates. So e-discovery, it's a plays a crucial role in the corporate compliance by ensuring that the organization can efficiently identify, collect, and produce relevant electronic data in response to a legal or regulatory request, right? So first of all, you need to identify the specific compliance requirements you need to address and the data sources that are involved. Your users are using emails, they could be using SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams chat. So you need to identify where all your users' data lies within Microsoft 365. Then you determine proper access controls for e-discovery features, right? So you make sure that not everybody has the same access. Your legal team has more access to look into the actual content of your users' mailboxes, while the person who is a compliance admin does not have that access. They may have a way to create a case, but they should not be the ones who are actually looking into the user's mailboxes, OneDrives. There is a lot of potential personal data that could be there that might get discovered. And if you give everybody the same access, that means you're not maintaining good delineation of duties, right? Then you determine the appropriate licenses your organization need based on the requirements. You make sure that you have the e-discovery standard or e-discovery premium based on the requirements of your users and your organization. Then you create the e-discovery case in compliance portal to manage the process. So you create a case, you start assigning which users or what keywords you want to search for. It doesn't always have to be a user. It could be like a project that you are looking for to put the e-discovery on the project so that you know that all these different SharePoint sites had that project information in it. So now we are going to hold information in all those project sites, for example. Okay, and then you can apply legal holds to the custodians. You can identify custodians are more like people. So essentially, custodian is like a person that you are putting a hold, and then you hold their Teams chat, you can hold their OneDrive, SharePoint, all that information. And then you can collect all this information and share it with your legal team or the compliance team, however your organization is set up. So what eDiscovery Premium gives you is it offers like automated workflows to preserve, collect, analyze, review, and export content. So your legal team can communicate with your custodians, which are your users in your system, to essentially be part of that investigation so they can provide justifications on certain things within the legal information that you have collected. Then the audit, as we talked. So you can track user activities across various Microsoft 365 services. As I mentioned, there are 30 Microsoft services that provide data into the audit. You can collect all that data and investigate essentially security incident, data leaks, or unauthorized access using the data, audit data. It's basically like a search portal where you can go in and start digging into particular activity that the user is performing. And if you want to identify what exactly they did on what day, you can look at those things. Okay? And it also talks about failed logins, failed file deletions, that kind of stuff. The last one is communications compliance. As I mentioned, here's where you would configure the communications compliance manager. You will ensure that what harmful words are being used, what can be perceived as a threat in your organization, how do you track it, how do you investigate, and how do you remediate, right? So there are different workflows that you can create. So it starts with configuring. So ensure that you know what all to track. Then you can investigate those through reporting, and then you will remediate those and close it out. Okay? And then continuously monitor communications compliance to ensure that your organization has essentially safety built in to the communications. So here are some of the best practices, right? I already touched upon many of these things, but just wanted to reiterate one more time that always ensure that you're doing a good assessment of your current state, right? You're making sure that you know where your data resides, you know what legal compliance policies you need to adhere to, and you also know how your users are using these systems so that you can keep them safe. Then gather compliance requirements, talk with different, essentially the fourth point, which was like partner with legal and compliance team. So you can gather compliance requirements from all these different departments and also look at different applications that you can implement to stay compliant and based on the needs, right? So these requirements will drive some of these discussions to get different applications or add more licensing to your current applications, that kind of stuff. So make sure you talk with your legal and compliance team often to ensure you are staying compliant. Also build automation for continuous compliance assessment. So definitely utilize the compliance manager to build these automations and also stay compliant. Use a phased rollout approach. You cannot bite everything in Purview at the same time. So if you start your process, right, if you start having a roadmap, ensure that you have a phased approach, that you start with somewhere, start doing the content inventory, right? For example, start looking at the content viewer and activity viewer. Those are out of the box available, and all the classification rules and everything, they are already getting a lot of data in that. So you can start looking at it and start understanding your data. And then you can start providing effective, and communication to improve adoption. So once you have started rolling out, right, make sure that you have good training and adoption plan. And then you can review the improvement actions to increase the compliance. So look at the compliance manager. It will tell you what all compliance issues you are having so that you can start addressing those and maintaining a good environment. And make sure you monitor and audit. So these are some of the best practices that you can implement. And this is how NetWoven typically looks at when we have a Microsoft Purview solution. So we always start with readiness assessment. This is where we would have questionnaires for our for our client stakeholders. We will ensure what kind of compliance standards they need to meet. We will come up with like implementation plans, timelines based on these assessments, and stakeholder interviews. The next step we do is we prepare the environment and we build use cases, test cases, right? We get the requirements, we build use cases, then we start implementing the solutions that we understand from the requirement need to be implemented. And then we use basically the assessment to start following how compliant our client is in all the different measures. Then we do the configuration. We define the data sources, the different connectors. If we are going to implement some kind of a compliance for box.com, we will always make sure that we have connectivity with Box, we have the connector built in, and then we will start basically applying some of these compliance standards to that data source as well. So integration, finding different types of data sources that have potentially risky information is also important. So you're not just focusing on M365, you're also looking at other data sources of collaboration, right? And then we do some pilot deployment. We will basically do the configuration targeted to a smaller audience, get some understanding on how well they have tested this system. We'll understand from the test case execution whether they had challenges, how we can refine some of these policies. And then we also provide proper training. And then finally, we analyze results and then fine tune things. So you can implement very similar things in your environment, your organization, and then we do monitoring. We make sure the assessment is progressing well, and we get that number high enough that we have confidence that we are meeting some of the standards well. Reviewing the log is important, as I mentioned, auditing is important. And then finally, we deploy this solution to production. That's where we basically build in some governance, we build in training, adoption, and also monitoring more closely of all these solutions. And by then, we typically have a refined environment where we know that we don't have too many false positives on the DLP or information protection, and we are securing things very well. All right, Matt. So
All
thank you
right.
for
Well, thank you,
listening.
Manish.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Just quick call to action for people that might be interested in next steps. NetWoven does offer a free data security and governance primer workshop where we get in, we bring our experts like Manish, myself in there, talk through what some of your goals are, where you are in your maturity level with data security and governance, covers compliance. We also have an advanced data security and governance workshop that we dive into compliance manager, all of the components of Purview that Manish had talked about, and set some of that stuff up. We also offer a readiness assessment to understand where you are in terms of adopting newer technologies from a compliance standpoint. So, are you able to enable Copilot in all of your regions, or are some of your regions fighting regulations against it? So, any of these workshops sound good, please email us at info@netwoven.com, and one of our sales folks would be happy to reach out. Manish, I did see a few questions come over in Q&A, so I thought I'd put
Yeah,
you on the spot and ask you.
sounds
There
good.
is a great one that asked, what do I get with eDiscovery Premium that I don't get with eDiscovery Standard? I know you had
Yeah,
touched on eDiscovery briefly, but
yep,
maybe you
yep.
could hit that.
So e-discovery standard gives you all the case management, right? So it gives you more like the manual case management. You can put things in hold and analyze it. But what e-discovery premium gives you is essentially it builds up on the standard, obviously, and it provides an end-to-end workflow to preserve, collect, analyze, review, and export content. That's responsive. So it's responsive to your organization, internal and external investigation. It also lets the legal team communicate with the custodians that are involved in the case. So it's not a manual step that you have to do. In standard, you have to do all these steps manually, while in eDiscovery Premium, you can automate some of these things and you can build a workflow around it.
Cool. And I think I saw in the release notes last year, was it, that Premium also now has OCR capabilities?
Oh, is that
Or
right?
is it?
Okay.
Yeah. So, those
Gotcha.
images and
Hmm.
TIFF files,
Got it.
PNGs,
Yeah.
I think you can now do those data scans using the Premium version.
Gotcha.
Next question was, what license type do I need for accessing Compliance Manager? I know you talked about Compliance Manager.
Yeah.
What
So
license?
yeah, so organizations with Office 365, Microsoft 365 licenses should have access to Compliance Manager. Typically, if you want to
Yeah.
create like an assessment template, you will need like the E5, A5, or G5 license. So for assessment templates, you definitely need a E5 or A5.
Okay. Yeah, and I was puzzled because I think I've always seen Compliance Manager enabled, and I haven't even
Hmm.
thought about licensing. So yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense. If
yeah.
if
Yep.
you do have M365 or O365, you would
Hmm.
have access to Compliance Manager.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
okay. And the next one was related to Compliance Manager. Um, how many premium templates do I have for free? I think that
Yeah,
varies, but
right, right. So I think you can select up to 3 premium regulatory templates for free. Yeah. And then,
great. Yeah, that's yeah. If you got more than that, that's a handful.
yep.
All right. Well, I know we're running out of time. I did want to just hit real quick, and I apologize if you did ask a question and I didn't get an answer to it. Our sales reps will be reaching out, and we can provide the answer over email. But a real quick shout out on our upcoming webinars. Like I mentioned, this is the fourth of 6 in a series about how to use Purview for data security and governance. Next one comes up next month, so keep an eye out for that one. Our marketing team will definitely be able to expand on the agenda of that. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for attending the best webinar on compliance inside of Purview, March 2024. I think we've got that
Yes.
beat.
Yes, we did.
All right. Well, thank you,
Thank you,
everybody,
everyone.
and thank you, Manish, for a great presentation. Have a
Thanks
great rest
all.
of the day,
Yep.
everybody.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.